Good morning, everybody. And for those of you who joined us at the JCRC annual meeting last night, honoring Ron Paul and welcoming our incoming president, Thorne Posen, thank you so much for joining us. I also see a very special person on the line, Jeff Kupfer, who him and his wife, Shelley, are going to be our Community Leadership Award, Stuart Lesson's Community Leadership Award honorees this coming September 15th. So Jeff, thank you for joining us. It's an honor to have you. And again, and that's our gala. Our gala again will be September 15th. Good morning, everyone. My name is Ron Halbert. I'm the director of the JCRC, and I am thrilled to introduce you to my friend and gubernatorial candidate, Doug Gansler. As a 501c3, and this is critical, the JCR does not support or oppose a candidate for public office. However, these meetings are critical to fulfilling our mission to educate the Jewish community and promote civic participation. Many of you should also be on the lookout that the JCRC has partnered with the Jewish Week to produce a magnificent product, a voter's guide, in which we asked over 104 candidates in contested elections, from governor all the way down to county council, Montgomery County, and is profiling. Not profiling, that's probably the wrong word, but is examining the candidates and providing you with answers to about 10 questions so you can make a guess. That's going to come out very shortly. The JCRC represents over 100 organizations and synagogues that advocate for the needs and values of the Jewish community, but also for the well-being for everyone in the region, including our most vulnerable citizens. We're focused on combating anti-Semitism, unapologetically supporting the state of Israel. We are strongly committed to cultivating a society based on freedom, equity, justice, and pluralism. And now let's get to our guest, and again, my friend, Doug Gansler, who's a familiar face because he served as Maryland's Attorney General from 2007 to 2015. In that role, Doug helped families during a period of severe economic uncertainty. Remember the recession of 2008. He got more than $1 billion from the countrywide financial corporation to help people stay in their homes. As Attorney General, he sought to protect all Marylanders from predatory lenders, polluters, and human traffickers. Doug was also the first statewide elected official in Maryland history to support marriage equality, which I remember distinctly because shortly thereafter, JCRC adopted a position and supported marriage equality. I was proud to receive one with pens that was used by Governor O'Malley to sign it into law. He later received Equality Maryland's Ally for Equality Award for support of LGBTQ rights. Doug also worked to deliver environmental justice, obtaining settlements when ExxonMobil released more than 25,000 gallons of gasoline into Maryland's waters and secured $4.6 million for air quality with American Electric Power, which is the largest environmental settlement in American history. Additionally, Doug established Maryland's Human Trafficking Task Force, which improved efforts to crack down on this despicable and disgusting practice, setting up operations to identify victims and traffickers, providing training for law enforcement officers, and reaching out, very importantly, to potential victims. He also created and implemented a state internet safety initiative known as CLICS that brought community leaders and experts to talk to children, teens, and parents to ensure kids are safe online. And for those of you who have teens, I've got 3 of them, you know how they are glued to their cell phones and their iPhones, how important that is. Previously, Doug served as Montgomery County State's Attorney, where he instituted important progressive criminal justice reforms and also prosecuted some of the county's worst criminals, like the Beltway snipers. For those of you who are in this county during that time, I think you remember us hovering behind our cars when we were at gas stations because we didn't know these people. The rumor was somebody in a white van was walking around shooting, and obviously Doug was very involved in that case. Welcome, Doug. Please talk to us about your run for governor. Why did you get on this race? What's on your agenda? What do you hope to achieve? The floor is yours, my friend.
Thank you, Ron. I really appreciate it. I appreciate everybody being here this morning to be on the Zoom. When you said, why did I run? I started thinking about my very first election I ever had was when I was in 6th grade at the JCC. And I don't remember what I ran for, but since I lost, I must have lost because I don't remember winning. Those kinds of things go out of your head. So been involved, obviously, in politics for a very long time, as well as the Jewish community. I guess we'll talk about that a little bit later. But I did grow up here. I'm the only of the major candidates, the only candidate that did grow up here. I guess 3 of them grew up in New York and 2 of them grew up in Massachusetts. Went to Chevy Chase Elementary. I'm still sitting here talking to you from Chevy Chase before I go into work today. And just always had public service instilled in my mind. My mother was a public school teacher in Montgomery County. My father was in government for a very long time. He ended up being the Undersecretary of Defense. And then they both passed away. And I got to say, JCRC was phenomenal for both of them. My mom lived in the Ring House. My dad was at Wasserman for a while. And just the care and both sort of medical care, but just emotional care and way in which they took care of my parents, I'll never forget. And actually my grandfather.
I remember we talked about that. You called me,
Yeah.
and your grandfather, was it like 100 or something? When
He was 100 and a half. He was very popular with the ladies. The time he got to be 100. And so anyway, it was a blessing. And I just thank you for all the Jewish community has done for me, for my family. In terms of politics, I just believe in government service. And so I was an assistant U.S. attorney for 6 years, prosecuting crimes with Eric Holder in D.C., mostly homicide, but you might remember the Georgian diplomat that killed the girl at DuPont Circle and a drunk driving case. I had that case and a number of others. Ran for state's attorney in Montgomery County. Nobody thought we could win. We had never had a Jewish state's attorney, actually. And interestingly, I did win. I beat 30 years of incumbency. And then right when I got there, you'll remember we had the Samuel Scheinbein case. So here I was, the first Jewish state's attorney in Montgomery County, and I think the 3rd statewide. And we had this situation where this young man killed another kid named Alfredo Teo, ran off to Israel. Israel wouldn't give him back. They withheld money from us. Anyway, ended up, we got a very long sentence for him there. And he ended up actually dying when he was about to get out. He couldn't envision, I guess, being in society and ended up death by police.
I remember he served, I think, was it 17 years in an Israeli prison? Or?
Yeah. And it was tough. I mean, and the Israeli and the Jewish community was I thought responded very well to that case and recognized that Israel was was not doing the right thing there, and it all worked out well. So then ran for attorney general. We never had someone from Montgomery County as attorney general. We won, served there for 8 years. I was president of all the attorneys general in the country for one of those years. I was the head of the Democratic Attorney General's Association for 3 years, and then ran for governor in 2014 against the sitting lieutenant governor, Anthony Brown. I lost the primary in that year, and as a result, we had a Republican governor for the last 8 years, who's done some very good things. Admittedly, he's done some very good things, but I think it's, obviously want to, as a Democrat, I think we ought to have someone with democratic values in the governor's chair. For the last 6 years, I've been in the private sector. I've been on a lot of boards. I started at Intercity Lacrosse League in Baltimore 12 years ago called Charm City Youth Lacrosse. So I'm very active in that. We have about 500 or 600 kids. We're helping them get into schools and so forth. On the board of college track, with the advisory board of the JCC, they finally kicked me off after 15 years. And represent the states in lawsuits against fossil fuel companies around climate change. Was kind of minding my own business. And Mike Miller, who never was a big fan of mine, he passed on, the last president of the Senate, started pushing me to run. And because he was not enamored with one of the candidates who is running and thought I was the only Democrat that could win the primary and the general election. And while it's true that I'm probably the only candidate that can win the general election, according to polling, the primary is going to be difficult. We have 10 people in it. People have started voting yesterday. And it's a bizarre time for politics that you could start voting yesterday, almost 5 weeks before the primary. And then there's early voting July 7th to the 14th. And I'm sure most people don't even know when the primary is. It's July 19th. And what's been interesting is, as you heard my background, this election really is about crime and criminal justice. And you see what's going on in Baltimore in particular, there's 400 human beings are murdered every year. And people won't go into Baltimore anymore. And you know, some people, why do we care? We live in Montgomery County, we live in DC suburbs, but you care because first of all, it's our biggest city, and these are real people, and we are paying for that city, and it's just tragic. And there's nobody else in this race on either side that has a scintilla of background in criminal justice and has any sort of have really any concept of what to do. So in terms of this issue and environmental issues as well, which we'll talk about. But there's a number of things we want to do that I've gleaned from my jobs in the past. One thing is add 1,000 police officers, well-trained on the street, trained in de-escalation techniques. You'll recall when I was here, some of you, I know Jeff does and some others, I was the first, we're the first prosecutor's office to fully implement community prosecution, which is prosecuting by neighborhoods instead of by crime. And we did it. We worked with the community police here in Montgomery County to identify crime, go to community meetings, work with the community police to proactively address criminal issues. We go to police roll calls and do training with them. And it was a very effective way of prosecuting. I mentioned the 400 murders in Baltimore. Montgomery County is the most diverse county in the state. We have 1.1 million people. And when I was the head law enforcement officer, we had 13 murders a year. And so, and really we're laser focused on gun crimes and diversifying our office and making sure the office looked like the community and the town. And I started on criminal justice reform because our deal is we want to bring crime down and lift justice up. And so I was the head of the NAACP Criminal Justice Committee in Montgomery County, starting in 1989. And we were working on diversity issues then, making sure our bench, the judges reflected the community as well. I put every police shooting, every time a police officer shot his or her gun, I put that in the grand jury, let the grand jury determine whether it was a justified shooting or not. We had the first domestic violence dockets in Maryland's history, which we will expand to the other 23 jurisdictions because—
Doug, can I ask you a quick question right there? Police officers today there's lots of concerns of the morale of police officers being down, that they don't get enough support, and it's hard for them to do their jobs. If you ask them to go before a grand jury, shouldn't there first be a departmental review or from someone else before you would do that to make sure that we're not unnecessarily prosecuting? How do you make sure that you back the police when it's a justified shooting and not make every police officer afraid to pull out their gun when they may need to do so if you're going to bring them to a grand jury? That's just a question that kind of like entered my head.
Yeah, and they had, and that was a concern when I brought it. I got it actually from Janet Reno. They did the Department of Justice, and I started doing it. But as somebody who's so far completely behind the police and in supportive of police, I think the culture starts at the beginning. I mean, I don't want to go into my long history of prosecutions, but one of them, for example, was when Terrence Green shot a guy named Kyle in a car in Silver Spring, shot one of my police officers, Kyle Olger, who ultimately died. And he's lying on the sidewalk in Silver Spring with his head on the curb saying, who's going to take care of my 13-year-old son? I personally went in the courtroom and prosecuted that case. I think it starts at the top, having support for police officers, making sure they're paid appropriately, trained appropriately, and supported appropriately. There was a concern that I was going to bring shootings into the grand jury, but those cases are investigated. And it worked very well. The police recognized that is a better system than having the state's attorney sort of try to whitewash those cases or not, particularly in today's environment. It's even more important, I think. And you talk to the grand jury about what the facts were, there are certainly bad police officers. I mean, and I guess I'll just deviate for 1 second and talk about my lieutenant governor with George Floyd being the case being where he had a bad police officer. Candace Hollingsworth was a city councilwoman in Hyattsville for 4 years. She was the mayor of Hyattsville for 6 years, turned the city around. George Floyd died. She was very concerned with this issue of police brutality and what they were doing. So she left being mayor of Hyattsville and started an organization called Our Black Party, which was a national organization of over 20,000 members addressing issues of police brutality issues, police reform issues, but also issues important to Black Americans. And she's wonderful. And every time I'm with her, I appreciate her. When we have these discussions all the time, we're sort of the yin and the yang on criminal justice, but we see completely eye to eye because we recognize that crime disproportionately impacts communities of color and underserved communities. And no one's getting murdered tonight in Potomac. And so we need to make sure that we do work on those issues. We need to have an SRO in every school, school resource officer, so that when we drop our children and grandchildren off to school, they feel safe and they are safe. And it also reduces the pipeline from kids that are going to put from high schools into the juvenile justice system, because issues other than, gun crimes and that kind of thing are handled right there at the school, and they're not put into the system. We're going to have drug courts. I started the first drug courts in Maryland's history. We had 2 of them in Montgomery County. And that takes that again, instead of putting more people in jail, you give people with health issues, with addiction issues, and a chance not to go into jail, to be creative and productive members of society. You all might know the Family Justice Center in Rockville. I started that. We're going to expand those around the state. We're going to have licensed mental health professionals available for all first responders, including police officers, and also for students. For every 250 students in our school system, we'll have licensed health professionals. And I already mentioned de-escalation techniques. The last thing I'll say, and then I'll stop, I'll come to a crescendo here. The last thing is being laser focused on gun crimes. We could all have different views on who should and should not be in jail, but I think we would agree that convicted felons that are toting guns and use those guns in a crime of violence should be in jail. So we'll take those cases and put them in the U.S. Attorney's Office and let the feds prosecute them where they have more strict sentences. I guess, and then let me just talk a little bit about sort of politics, policy, and then quickly wrap up politics. I sort of obviously I just focus heavily on crime because that's the #1 issue. It's the first time since the 1970s that criminal justice and criminal justice reform is the top issue above education and the economy for Marylanders. But I've led during times of crisis. We mentioned that the Joint Sniper Task Force I led with 1,400 people. And so I do believe I can lead and effectively during this time of criminal justice crisis. When I was president of all the attorneys general in the country, we had the national mortgage foreclosure crisis, and I led that settlement with the big banks. We took on the big banks. We had $38 billion come in around the country to keep people in their homes and away from being foreclosed upon. I think we need that same kind of leadership, somebody who's led during a crisis to help us recover from COVID, and to make sure we do it tapping into the potential and talents of every Marylander, wherever they come from and whatever they look like. When I was Attorney General, the environment was my biggest issue. We did 22 river audits. We cleaned up the Chesapeake Bay, not pristine like when John Smith was there, but we cleaned it up substantially, made a lot of progress, went after corporate polluters. Ron, you mentioned at the top some of the big cases we did, and we need to do that again going forward. We need to. There is no other candidate in this race that's done anything in the environmental space, let alone defended the Chesapeake Bay and took on climate change. So that's a huge issue. And then the other issue that I led, it's more of a personal crisis for people that were gay and couldn't marry the people they loved and were told they weren't allowed to. I wrote an opinion. I was 5 years ahead on that issue. I didn't really understand I still don't understand the other side of the issue. But then I wrote an opinion recognizing out-of-state same-sex marriage here in Maryland. And for that, the right wing tried to impeach me. They began impeachment proceedings in Annapolis. Well, I think we're going to have that same issue confronting us right now with Roe v. Wade being overturned and scaled back. We need to make sure we have a Democrat that's there to protect the right of women to have an abortion should they so choose. And we need to protect the right for people frankly from other states that want to come here to do so.
But Doug, as you're talking about that, the person asked, would you release the money that Hogan has held up to allow nurse practitioners and others to perform reproductive health services or an abortion?
Yeah, absolutely. That's, and that's, I'm glad that question was asked, because that's $3.5 billion. It's not going to sort of change the world, but it's really geared toward women that would be coming here from other places, because we're expecting a expansion of folks. But people say, well, Maryland's really liberal. First of all, it's not. Second, and so that's like, oh, we don't need to worry about a woman's right to choose in Maryland. But that's an example of certainly chipping away at the edges. Kelly Schultz is going to be the Republican nominee. I'm going to be a brick wall against any attempts to scale back reproductive rights for women. But Kelly Schultz, who's going to be the Republican and is a very, very, very formidable candidate. She's a moderate Republican. She's likable. She actually has experience. She's Governor Hogan's entire apparatus is behind her. She's got money already. She's going to be very difficult to beat. Now, she's pro-life. And she has said, well, I believe in Preston. I'm not going to change the law. Well, we just had 3 Supreme Court justices say that under oath, and we'll see what happens in the next few weeks. But it's going to, so that goes into politics. So I think, right now, and I alluded to this earlier, and I'll sort of drill down a second on it, we need to make sure that we have a Democrat that can win the general election. We cannot, as a Democratic Party, commit political suicide again and put up a nominee that we know will lose in the general election. That people are not going to vote for someone without experience. They're not going to get on an airplane with a pilot who's only read about how to fly and hasn't had years of experience going across the ocean on a plane. They're not going to vote for somebody who's unvetted. Some of the vetting that's even started already has disqualified some of the candidates from being electable in the general election. They want someone who's pro public safety, pro business, and more of a moderate on economic issues. Right. And so anyway, so that's where we are. With that, I'll subside and would love to hear your thoughts and take any questions.
So we have a bunch of questions, but I'm going to start with.
It's a Jewish group. What do you expect? I mean,
I understand that. I have a very, I've always talked tachlis over the years. I've been friends for many years, and so I got to ask you a question. I can see how, as a moderate Democrat in this lane, you could be a strong candidate against Kelly Schultz. But all the polls so far that I have seen show you trailing behind Moore, Perez, and Peter Franchot, and we have 30 days left in this election. Now, yes, we have 31% that are undecided. And you do have obviously incredible statewide name recognition, but what's your strategy to get to the top of the pack when you've got 30 days left?
Yeah, we actually have less than that. As I said, people started voting yesterday. But but no, I think, look, the polls are all over the place. They're somewhere between 30 and 66% undecided. Nobody is out of the teens at this point in the polling, the fake polls and the real polls. Even the fake polls have people at the highest at 18, 19%. And I guess I would flip it a little bit and say that, we're the only of the 6 major candidates. We're the only candidate that has not started spending money on television. We did today. I got a lot of ad comments. We just went up today on our ads. And I'm not going to talk about other candidates in a negative way, but one of them, for example, has spent $6 million and is at 12%. And so even in the fake poll. So we're pretty confident that people trust me. They know me. They know the record. The electability, I think, hopefully will be an issue. They want somebody who they've heard of. I mean, you probably don't want to hear a politics 101 lesson, but there'll be about 8 people. This group here on Zoom may be the amount of people who vote in the state. It is going to be such a low turnout. And the winner needs to have somewhere between 22 and 26%. And I'll tell you a poll that 2 polls that matter to me. One is, 3 polls that matter to me. One is a poll in Montgomery County, which had me at 71% name recognition among Democratic primary voters and 9% negative. And we're going to have 23%, almost a quarter of all the vote in the primary is going to be from Montgomery County. We've never had a governor from Montgomery County. I remember, you recall when we wanted to get our vaccinations on February 3rd, we asked for our vaccinations and we were all I schlepped to Baltimore, people were schlepping to Salisbury or Hagerstown.
I went to Pennsylvania.
And you went to Pennsylvania, and and we got our vaccination center at the end of April. We wanted it at the beginning of February. So we need to, it's important to have a governor from Montgomery County. So those numbers are, I think, are pretty important for us. The second poll I mentioned is Gansler College did a poll. Again, no one's fake poll, an independent poll, 3 or 4 months ago now, which said that a progressive Democrat, however you define that, and I would argue, given that I started the first civil rights department in Maryland's history, I ran Barack Obama's campaign, I did the mortgage foreclosure settlement, I led on gay marriage, and I'm an environmentalist. It's hard to believe this, but people are going to think of me as a moderate because I was been a prosecutor for 22 years and from Montgomery County and what have you. So a moderate Republican, Kelly Schultz, beats a progressive Democrat, Gansler College, in this state this year by 20%. I mean, this is going to be the most Republican year of our lives, so we can't make that same mistake again. And then the third poll was the Republicans themselves. The RGA did a poll which showed that I'm the only Democrat that can beat the Kelly Schultz, and the other Democrats lose by double digits to her. So they started actually doing ads against me and taking me on. In fact, Kelly Schultz herself is identifying me as taking me on because they know I'm the only one that can win. Now, does that mean I'm going to win the primary? Absolutely not. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you I'm going to win the primary. I have no idea. I've never been in an election like this in my life where people are voting by mail. They're doing early voting. It's the middle. It's going to be 1,000 degrees in the middle of July. We've got 10 candidates. So many of them are very good people. They've accomplished some things in their lives. The couple of them are from New York and did, one of them did a nonprofit in New York, one of them did schools in New York. And so, who knows? So anyway, that's where we are. That's where we are.
All right, so Doug, we have about a half hour and we got some really interesting questions coming up. So I'm going to try and get them out to you quickly, as succinct as you can answer, because I'd like to get as many people in as possible. First one is from my friend, Rich Cirillo, who's joined us just about every one of these forums. If there's anybody who has kept an open mind, I think he sets the record for being on every gubernatorial forum so far we've had. Doug, thank you for joining us today. What can we do to stem gun violence in our city streets? Our kids need jobs and hope. By the way, I'm a big fan of de-escalation programs and community policing. Doug, what do we do to stem what do we do to stem the tide of gun violence on our city streets? And Montgomery County, by the way, as we know, is not immune to this.
Not immune at all. In fact, I mean, as we sit here and have this conversation, in a county of 1.1 million people, there's 13 cadets in the police department. I mean, new police department. There are nights when there's no one on patrol in the Bethesda Police District and others. So it's a huge problem.
Can you say that again?
There are nights when there's no one on patrol in some of the police districts in Montgomery County because we don't have enough police officers. People don't want to be police officers. You mentioned it earlier. There's a lot of stigma right now against it. We're beating up on our police officers, and frankly, we've got great police officers, and we ought to have more of them. And we ought to keep people safer, but they should be trained. And they need to be trained in de-escalation. They need to be trained in the law. Part of community prosecution that I started is getting prosecutors to go to roll calls and work with police and have them understand what they can do and they can't do. We need to have licensed mental health professionals available to them and to the students and young people who are committing crimes. We need mental health regional centers around the state. We're going to have 10 of them around the state as well. In terms of guns, though, I just have never understood why any human being, no one's convinced me of any human being why they need an assault rifle or a semi-automatic. I mean, I prosecuted in Washington, D.C. when you were not allowed to have a gun, which led to the Heller case, which overturned the Second Amendment being a collective right, like it says right there in the Second Amendment for the militia to become an individual right. But interestingly, and I know Ron wants me to be succinct, but I can't on this one. Just on this last point. In Heller, what Heller said in the Supreme Court said, you can have a handgun in your house to be used for self-defense. Those are the three conditions. And yet the gun people use it to say, well, we have a Second Amendment right to this and that. They don't. So we need to prosecute criminals with guns. If you want to have a gun in your house to protect your family or you're a hunter or whatever, that's fine. But we need to have go after the felons with guns, put them in jail, and we need to reduce the amount of guns that are coming in. We did well with the ghost gun legislation. I fought and got guns out of the hands of domestic violence, people accused of domestic violence, but we need to do obviously way more than that. I prosecuted too many people that have taken too many lives with guns in my 22 years as a prosecutor.
Doug, how will you deal with pressure to support BDS? Will you uphold Governor Hogan's executive order? And what will you do to strengthen ties between Maryland and Israel?
I will. I absolutely will uphold it, and I'm actually will enhance boost as well. But as we start talking about Israel, so I'm going to show you this picture. I brought it out as one of my favorites. That's me and Shimon Peres, who was 89 years old. I was the head of the I was the head of the National Association of Attorneys General, and I led a trip to Israel. And that was in the wake of, there was actually a Jewish Attorney General. I started something called JAGA, the Jewish Attorney General Association. But
how many members were there, by the way?
We had like 10 back then. There's still a lot right now. So there's the guy named Sam Olens, who was a Republican Attorney General of Georgia, and he and I wrote a letter to Congress asking for divestiture from Iran at that time. And in the wake of that, we went and I was literally talking to Shimon Peres about that at that particular meeting when that picture was taken. So yes, I'm unabashedly for that. In terms of Israel, I've been there 3 times on 3 different trips. They're both very different. I was in high school. I worked on kibbutz, Messy Load up in the north in Sea Galley, which was obviously a very interesting experience as a 10th grader. I then led this trip with a bunch of attorneys general. And then my son played for Team Israel in lacrosse, and I went and took him over there. We went to in Ashkelon. So my first foreign trip will be to Israel, and we will continue to build the relationship between Israel and the United States. I will just sort of as an aside, when I was state's attorney and I was attorney general, I led all the state's attorneys in Maryland, and then when I was attorney general in the country, on a tour of the Holocaust Museum. They opened it up for us early. We went, and I thought that was important for them to see because they have the power of the law to use that to make sure it's used in the right way, and we'll do that for governors as well.
Doug, so I guess this is a question. How do you propose, Edith Goldman asked, how do you propose to overcome voter apathy, not only in the primary, but I guess if I extend that question out a little bit, it's also how do you get your message out in a crowded field of 10 people when everybody is voting on July 19th and people are on vacation? Although we do know that a lot of people have requested paper ballots in advance. So that is a fact in that question. Well,
I got to raise a lot of shekels and get on TV more.
I would go with dollars, the value.
Yeah, exactly. With the exchange rate. No, but look, I got to raise money. We are on television now. We have enough money to get our message out. It is a crowded field. The apathy is overwhelming. So it's interesting. In the federal race for president, there were a lot of people like Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, Pete Buttigieg, but at the end they hated Trump so much that they went with Biden because he was the person that could win. I don't have that luxury in this race because clearly I'm the most likely person to win as the Democrat. In fact, the rest would lose and some would lose by 25 to 30 points.
Does that include Westmore? Does that include Westmore, Tom Perez, and Peter Franchot?
I don't want to get into personal things, but the first 2 would lose by certainly more than 20%. Franchot is more of an interesting character. I mean, he's 75 years old. He's been around for 36 years. He can ideologically go wherever he needs to go because he does. He's a little untethered in that way, but I think he'd still have a very, 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 very difficult time winning because he doesn't have the Democrats behind him. He doesn't support our last candidate, and albeit our last candidate lost by more than any candidate's ever lost in the history of Maryland. Ben Jealous did, and Westmore is certainly just an extension of that without even the vetting piece. But it's going to be interesting to see what we do there because people like Hogan. I mean, in our poll, 74% of Democratic primary voters had a favorable impression of Hogan. So they're not that energized to come out and get rid of the Republicans. So we have to get our message out. We're knocking on doors. I'm all over the state. For example, we had something called the Western Maryland Democratic Caucus, which is the first time that nobody actually was not a fake poll. It was real people voting.
I think you came in second, which was.
I came in first among Western Marylanders. You mentioned Westmore. He's got $10 million, whatever. He bussed in a bunch of people from Baltimore City, but with Western Marylanders, we won. But importantly, I had 71 votes. We all gave our spiel, and I had 71 votes. President 46, King had 45, and Peter Francho had 10, which was supposed to be his stronghold, Western Maryland. So we think, we have the good thing about having run, this is my fourth time running, is we have organizations all over the state. That's very helpful. And when you need to win 22%, you do well in Montgomery County, Western Maryland, Southern Maryland, the shore, you're getting there. And then in Baltimore County and Pikesville area and so forth.
Doug, as we're waiting for some more questions, and Jane Collins asks, how do we access our gubernatorial forms? They're all on our YouTube page. About 24 hours after we hold them, anybody can go up and see any of our past conversations, any of the past gubernatorial candidates. Doug, right now the winds of inflation are eroding the dollar, and Americans primarily below the primarily those who are already low income wage workers are really facing a terrible economic hardship as it eats into basic things like food and gas. What kind of ability do you have on the state level if you become governor, and assuming inflation is still going rampant, and the Fed's interest rates haven't had the ability to calm it down? What power would you have as the governor to help alleviate the economic concerns for lower income working families in Maryland?
Well, I'm glad you asked about lower income, because this is an incredibly bright crowd on this Zoom call. And so I'm not going to say, oh, the governor's going to take care of inflation. We can't do that. It's not the governor's job, but we can make sure we continue the gas to withhold the gas tax for as long as need be for working families. And we cannot raise new taxes. And we just can't keep raising taxes. We should not have new taxes for families that can barely get by as it is. And we need to have a pro-business governor, somebody who actually supports small businesses. We talk as Democrats all the time about wages and jobs, and those are incredibly important, but the unemployment is very low. We need to talk to Democrats about supporting the companies and businesses that provide those jobs. Right here in Montgomery County, we watch people going over to Northern Virginia every day because we don't support our jobs. We're doing better than we were, but there's 500 Fortune 500 companies by definition. We have 3 of them headquartered here. Maybe there's a few more now, 4 or 5.
How many should we have?
We're outside of DC. We're the smartest state in the country. We should have our fair share anyway, a proportional share. I don't want, I think we just need to make it welcoming, but we need to make sure that we take care of all of our citizens, and we need to make sure we get the blueprint passed, and of course for education, because I think that's real economic empowerment, is to make sure our children are educated. I remember when I grew up, Walt Whitman was on the cover of Time magazine, Walt Whitman High School, the super school, the #1 school in the country. We don't talk like that anymore about our Maryland schools, and we need a Democrat that can actually win to get in there and make sure we get the blueprint passed, because that gives economic empowerment. We need to have vocational training in schools available for people so they can get jobs, talking about working families. So I think, one of the things that's interesting here is Governor Hogan's very popular, but not with the legislature, because it's a Democratic legislature and he's a Republican. So he says it's green, they say it's red. So we need to make sure we have a Democrat that can work with the legislature to create an economically viable environment for folks, particularly as we come out of COVID. And it's going to look different as we come out of COVID as well.
So the next question comes from Miriam Galston, Professor Miriam Galston, who I'm thrilled is back on the board of JCRC. Miriam, would you like to pose a question to candidate Doug Gansler?
Yes, basically following up on the last question and answer. But first, I want to thank you not only for coming, but for all the wonderful things you've done, all your accomplishments. They are super impressive. My question is, every week I seem to read in the paper that Virginia has attracted, one business or another. Today it was the Lego company is going to be setting up in Virginia, and my grandchildren are going to be very unhappy that it's not in Maryland. And so, just to repeat some of the things you said, we need to do better. We need to support small businesses. Can you give us more specifics about what you would do to attract new business into Montgomery County or the state as a whole? and how you, and second, how you would support small businesses to a greater degree or in a different way than they're being supported now.
Yeah, and obviously that's a long question and a lot of, I guess I'd start with having somebody who's actually run government, understanding how to get things done in government. We talk about experience, and yes, I had 23 years in government, but just because I sat around in government for 23 years doesn't make me qualified. What does is the way in which I've been able to understand and manipulate the levers of government to effectuate positive change. And for example, I was just in the Eastern Shore yesterday, and I want to build a power plant on the Eastern Shore, a clean power plant to convert, excuse me, I took an allergy pill and tried out, but they convert the 2 billion pounds of chicken manure that goes into the Chesapeake Bay every year. It's our biggest organic source of pollution. We have the technology to build a plant, diverting the power, and that provides jobs. Offshore wind off of Ocean City provides jobs, and we'll do that. Solar power, residential, commercial, and on state lands provides jobs. Western Maryland, if you go out there, the Cumberland area, all the jobs, all the manufacturing companies have left. We're going to move a government agency out there, the Department of Natural Resources. So in terms of Montgomery County, providing access to capital is going to be critical, and making sure that we are really talking to businesses about what incentives we can give. We beat up on companies all the time, and we said, we're not going to give you a tax break, because you're a rich company. So Virginia said, we will, and there they go. I mean, the biotech industry, for example, focus on Montgomery County, the biotech industry, we have such an incredible footprint. I remember when MedImmune moved here, and now they've been sold, but we have these brilliant people. We have the #1 hospital in the world in Maryland, Johns Hopkins. We have, a footprint there that's available to build upon, yet we are not going out and actively seeking companies. The Secretary of Commerce has been almost more of a symbolic job than a real job. And we need to really give that agency teeth to go out and talk to companies that are thinking about leaving or thinking about coming, and asking them what they want and what they need and what incentives they need. And obviously we're not going to give away the fort, but we need to provide them incentives to come here and want to be here. We have the brain power, we have the employees, we just need them to want to come here. And our schools are not, dilapidated and terrible. They are in some parts of the state, but we need to make sure we keep education up too.
Doug, one of the things that the JCRC does on behalf of our Jewish community is that, and you're well aware of this, is that we lobby for funds on the state and local level, both at the state in Annapolis and both locally in Montgomery County, to provide social services to the vast array of non-sectarian Jewish organizations that we provide, like Jewish Foundation for Group Homes, which is now Macomb. I got that right, Jeff? Okay. And Jess and the community center, where I think you were on the board for many years. And it's almost become cliche that when we want to get money for capital, we go to the state. And when we want to get money for operating, we go to the county. And we've had some success. For example, we do get a couple $100,000 every year from the state for the Jewish Social Service Agency to help support elderly and Holocaust survivors. We get some money for Elder Safe to protect people at the Hebrew home who have been victims of abuse. And but when it comes to the state, we usually we're able to get money either through the governor's budget for whether it's the University of College Park Hillel, every major Jewish building that has gone up in the last 10 years has received millions of state funds and county funds. But the one thing that we are short on in this state, and I can tell you this because I've been doing this for 25 years, is we don't give out enough operating money. The hardest part of running a nonprofit is keeping, you can buy a building, all right, and people are willing to donate to a building. The state has bonds they can float for 30 years that can pay off for capital expenses. But the problem is that we need more operating money. When we hire a social worker for $80,000 to $100,000 a year, for Jacada, we're able to help 20 women get out of domestic abuse. When we buy additional aids to take care of people at Macomb, we're able to service more people in an appropriate way. It's the operating pressure that we felt to crush during the pandemic. And now that we're out of it, I want to know what we can do as a state to say that this to truly make the public-private partnership, because the nonprofits are on the front line of delivering the service. If the nonprofits close down tomorrow, the state would get hit with a hurricane. So the question is, what can we do in the state to invest more money in the operating budgets of nonprofits so we can take care of our fellow citizens who we love and need to care about?
Yeah, and I was on the board of the Jewish Foundation for Group Homes Forever, and my nephew in Atlanta has very severe disabilities, and I'm trying to get my sister to come up here because we do have great services, particularly here in Montgomery County. And all I can say is that, that as governor, the Jewish community and the Montgomery County community is going to have my attention, and we're going to figure out what the needs are. And I couldn't agree with you more, Ron, about the relationship of government to the nonprofit sector. I mean, I was on the board of Year Up right now. I mean, since in the private sector, been on the board of Year Up. I've been on the board of College Track, which is Kevin Durant thing over at Suitland, helping kids get to college. I talk about Charm City. I do a Washington Regional Alcohol Program. There's a lot. The nonprofits do so much of the work that government maybe ought to do or used to do. That
we would say let us do it. That we do
let you do it. Let you do it. Give you the money to make you do to make you be able to do it on an operational standpoint as well as a capital standpoint, and let you therefore take that off of the government's plate, so the government can be supportive but focus on other stuff. Frankly, you're better. I mean, who's ever going to say that the government is better at doing something than the nonprofit world or the private sector? So yes.
See, I think our agencies. If you've ever looked in DC at the way group homes are run by the city, they're in terrible state. I think Macomb, for example, could be a tremendous advisor to the DC government in terms of helping them get their group home expertise that we could provide in-house that we've gathered in other regions. Question, affordable housing. During the COVID crisis, JCRC was very involved at the local level in lobbying for additional funds to help keep people in their homes. That only highlighted what we knew was already a crisis: affordable housing. We want our police officers and teachers and other people who are serving our community to be able to afford to live here. And if we're going to grow our economy, create new jobs, and build new schools, how are we going to go ahead and accelerate our housing affordability to accommodate that growth that we need in the future, and so that people don't have to pay 70% of their income on renting an apartment or making a mortgage payment, especially as interest rates are now rising.
Yeah, and want to make them safe when they live there. Affordable housing has obviously been an issue. We've made great strides in Montgomery County, for example, over time, and we got to continue to do that. One of the places that I want to focus on affordable housing is transit or affordable housing hopefully the Purple Line will actually be built, billions of dollars over and many years late, but hopefully it'll be built. There's a lot of mass transit that will be built. We need to make sure that we do affordable housing around transit, because that allows people with less money to be able to get to their jobs to make more money. So affordable housing, I remember when it was first brought in here, and people were like, well, you're gonna have poor people living in wealthy neighborhoods and there goes the neighborhood. That has just not been the case. And we've done it pretty smartly. And we just need to do more of it in a more wholesale fashion.
So many people on this call may not be aware, but there's a program called Boost, which provides about $10 million a year to private school students that are on free and reduced meals. The majority of that money, I think 55%, goes to minority students. 90 Jewish students who attend mostly Torah and Yeshiva in Washington, about 11 who go to Berman benefit from that. And we get about 200,000, but the Baltimore Jewish community gets about $2.4 million, and over 1,100 students vote for this. This has become a very, very contentious issue. It's mostly not, I don't think, around the money, but about the role of whether public money should go to private schools. At JCRC, we believe that we believe this is a false binary. We think they're all our children, whether they go to public school, whether they go to private school. We have an obligation to help. And as JCRC, we'd like to see the expansion of this program. We view it as a rounding error in a budget that already gives billions of dollars to public schools. All three of my kids go to public school, have gone, very proud. The Montgomery County school system was fantastic for them, got all the support they got. But so what is your, in addition to what you think about the Boost program, this fight between public and private schools has an intensity in Maryland that it doesn't have in other states.
Yeah,
it just doesn't. And how do you, as governor, sort of bring everybody together to stop this stupid fighting? As the way my feeling is very strong on this ridiculous fighting between, and realize that they're all our community's children, and that we need to, and there's ways we need to find to work together and to make it about us and not about this one versus that one.
Yeah, and we should increase Boost. And, you know, as you mentioned in Baltimore, it's particularly important. I was up at Ner Israel with the rabbis and up there a couple weeks back, and we were talking about this very issue. And look, $10 million is some really, really rich guy's tax bill. You know, it's just not a lot of money in the grand scheme of things. And frankly, I never really understood this fight between private versus public schools. You send your kids where you want to send your kids. But by the way, if you send your kids to private school, you're still paying your taxes, an enormous amount of which goes to the public schools. But we need to support our public schools. And so Boost does not take away from that, but it does allow people, particularly as you mentioned, Ron, because most people don't mention this, it's going to poor people, you know, and so kids that can't otherwise afford it, and they're going to religious schools. It's actually one of these places where the Jewish community and the Catholic community are aligned, because a lot of the Catholic schools have the same issue regarding Boost. And as you know, Maryland was founded by Catholics, still 25% Catholic. So I think that that's going to, you know, the Boost program is not going anywhere when I'm governor.
Along the lines of affordable housing, thank you for your answer, Doug. Jane Collins asked, there are exorbitant rent increases after the expiration of the COVID cap, which really, which is more of a moratorium, which really affects seniors and low-income people. What can we do about that?
Well, what's being discussed right now to do about is more an escalating scale of caps, which, you know, makes some sense. I mean, if you're going to raise rents, you can't, it just seems unfair to say, okay, the cap is now lifted and I'm gonna raise your rent, you know, 50%. And so having to escalate it and graduate it does make some sense. But we need to protect our seniors, and we need to have more senior homes. I mean, the JCRC and the Jewish community in general in Montgomery County throughout the state has incredible facilities. And like I said, my families live there, my parents and grandparents. And so we need to make sure that we do as much as we can to allow people to stay at home and age at home. But there are people that need to go to facilities and want to go to facilities, and we want to make those facilities as nice as possible and as affordable as possible. And, you know, JCC or JCRC does a good job of that, with, you know, Landau and Ring House and different levels of cost. And we need, as a government, support people, make sure that they have dignity as they age. I think that's going to be. I'm just a huge proponent of intergenerational relationships. I'm just happy that my kids got to know my parents and my grandparents, and I think that's important. We need to do everything we can as a government to support that, and not have our older people feel like they can't afford to live here, so they move to Delaware and Pennsylvania.
Doug, we have about 3 minutes left in the call. I'm gonna, because I like to end calls, you know, within the hour time that we have, since people are being so generous. You got 2 minutes to ask everybody, to tell everybody why, when, how, and give people 3 reasons why they should vote for you for governor.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks again for being here. And our website, I think someone might have put it on, Aaron might put it on there, douggansler.com, and you can look more about our mental health program, which is incredibly robust, our Safe Maryland plan, which obviously addresses this criminal justice issue, and our environmental plan, our Green Maryland plan, which is by far the most extensive, because that's where my background is, Attorney General. But I think, look, I think we need somebody that people can trust. I think the election is July 19th. Early voting is July 7th to the 14th. And you can still actually get your ballot, I think, until you can request a ballot until June 28th, or 26th or 28th, and to vote by mail. But I think it's really important that we have somebody that has experience, has been vetted, and has a record of accomplishment. Rhetoric does not make a record, and we need to have somebody that can beat the Republicans in the fall. I just can't. This is going to be the most Republican year of our lives. For whatever reason, we can talk about whether it's a backlash against woke liberalism, whether it's, the Democrats control all three chambers, the presidency, the Senate, the House on Capitol Hill. Whatever the reason is, you're seeing it all over the country, and we need somebody that people, the moderates and the independents, will vote for in the general election. We just can't afford, particularly with Roe v. Wade on the ballot, with crime on the ballot, with COVID recovery and the economy on the ballot. We've talked about affordable housing on the ballot. We just cannot afford to lose this election for the wrong reasons, and we can't commit political suicide as Democrats. So thank you for your.
Actually, Doug, I'm going to ask you one more quick question, if it's okay, from Jeff Kuffer. Is there any, and I apologize, I just want to, again, to me, these forums are all about getting the opportunity to ask you questions one-on-one. Are there any pivotal endorsements, debates that are coming up that could help your campaign, or is it just basic getting out the vote and continuing the election? Is there something that, like, if you get that, is there a specific endorsement that's going to change the balance of this election for you? I
don't think anyone votes on endorsements. We all have our endorsements. Jeff's endorsing me because he and I go back to Yale and to the U.S. Attorney's Office.
That could turn the tide of the election, right?
That could be helpful. And I don't even know. I'm teasing. I don't know if he's endorsing me, but I think there's a long time on his line. But no, I mean, look, these other guys don't want to debate because they get exposed. So we had the one debate which we won pretty handily, which was on Maryland Public Television last week or two. And we've had forums every night, but most of them don't show up. They're raising money from Oprah Winfrey or putting fake ads about how Barack Obama endorsed them, which of course he didn't. And that's they choose to do it that way. I do it on trust. I do it on record. I do it on experience. And and we are, like I said, we're on television now, which is going to be a big advantage. And there's no poll that has anybody winning. And there's a lot of polls. And I had with probably one of the most famous pollsters in the country. I had a dinner Friday night. And we were talking about this idea that 30 to 60% of Marylanders are still undecided. And he said, it's actually, you shouldn't focus on that. You should focus on the other third, because they're not decided either. Usually at this point, like a month out, it's 6 to 8% undecided. Now you have 30 to 60%, depending on what poll you're looking at. It means the other 30% are soft, that nobody's sort of really ground in on a particular candidate. So everybody's persuadable. We just have to get our message out. We think we're doing it. It's a momentum. Timing matters, and I think the momentum is now.
Doug, thank you very much for taking a full hour out of your campaign time to meet with members of the Jewish community. Folks on this call, we really appreciate your joining us. This was a really great turnout, and we will continue. I think we have Debbie. We have left candidates for Attorney General. And what others are we hosting at this point besides Attorney General? Controller. And we've done county executive, and we do this as a public forum. We have a fantastic Washington Jewish Week JCRC nonpartisan a guide again that I'm going to mention. Please read it. It is very extensive, and we did this for you. We did this as a public service so you can help choose your candidates. And this is one of the reasons why you fund a vibrant JCRC, so that we can do this for you. And we're also going to be hosting forums for congressional District 4. We've had Glenn Ivey already, and we're going to be having former Congresswoman Donna Edwards and former Delegate Angela Angel join us. So again, thank you for joining us.